This session, it's all about knowledge equity. And we've got Nick Sheppard and Antonio Martinez Arboleda here today, who are going to be delivering the session. And just to introduce them a little bit, so Nick is an open research advisor in the team that I work in, so we're colleagues, and he is an expert in open research. Would you describe yourself as an expert?
Well, yeah, I'm always a bit wary of the word expert.
Well, I think you are. You're very knowledgeable about open research. He's a member of the university's Open Research Advisory Board and is involved in several initiatives to promote open research, including the Knowledge Equity Network, which will be mentioned today. So Antonio is professor in the School of Languages, Cultures and Societies, and he is the Knowledge Equity Network senior lead. Also, the university's academic lead for open educational practice and the university's co-director of the Centre for Research in Digital Education. So got two people here with lots and lots of experience, lots of knowledge that they're going to share with you today. So I will pass over to Nick and Antonio.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. We have got a relatively small and select group of colleagues this afternoon. So thank you for joining us on this last afternoon of the research profile boot camp. As Jen says, we will be talking about knowledge equity this afternoon, and it's a very big subject, and she did introduce me then as an expert, which is quite a title to live up to, but just really to emphasize that I suppose, you know, Antonio and I are coming at this from slightly different angles, although related. So I'm open research activity, whereas Antonio's talking more from the open education side. So I know that, you know, we certainly have already, haven't we, Antonio, learned a lot from one another, and we're certainly keen to learn more from one another and also from the colleagues here today. So with that in mind, I shall hand over to Antonio and just ask you as well, please, because we are such a small number, please do feel free to post in the chat, maybe tell us a little bit about yourselves and what interest you have in knowledge equity, and hopefully we can have a good conversation this afternoon and to talk about some of the principles about knowledge equity and the work that Antonio and I are doing in the Leeds. So with that, Antonio,
yes,
let you introduce yourself.
Yes, fantastic. Thank you so much, Nick, and thank you so much, Jenny, for the kind invitation. Nick and I have known each other for many years now. And when he was talking about experts, you know, I like to class myself first and foremost as an activist of openness, yeah, because there is an element of personal involvement based on the values that we cherish in every single aspect of what we do for open education, open research, knowledge equity, diversity and inclusion. Yeah, it's a very values-driven professional endeavor, actually, as you will see throughout the session today. And what Nick said, absolutely fantastic. Please introduce yourselves in the chat, say why you're here, what attracted you to this session, because, you know, it's a Friday afternoon. We want to have interaction. We want to have some warmth, yeah, in this event. So there are some learning outcomes, yeah. I like to think that at the end of this session, you will understand what the Knowledge Equity Network is and how you can personally be involved in it. Understand what knowledge equity is, because it's actually a moving concept, but with some solid underpinning, yeah. And what are the main challenges for knowledge equity in the world, and some ideas about how you can personally contribute as an advocate of openness and as an advocate of knowledge equity within your professional space, yeah. So, Nick?
Yeah, so the first thing to do is to introduce you to the Knowledge Equity Network. So this is an initiative co-founded by the University of Leeds with the University of Pretoria. We're coming up to 2 years now, in fact, of the network, and if you follow that QR code, it'll take you to the declaration, and we really encourage you to sign up to that declaration as an individual if you agree with the principles. We won't go into it in too much detail today, but just to highlight that at the moment, I think we've got 373 individual signatories, which I'm one. I'm sure Antonio is as well. We've got 27 higher education institutions. These are global as well, of course. We're trying to collaborate globally. That's the intention of the network and the declaration. 45 organisations, so that's organisations that aren't HEIs, various different types of organisations. You can see if you have a look on the website of it's all listed there in terms of who is organised, and they're from 67 countries. So as I say, we've got representation from right across the globe. Hopefully that QR code will work for you, and perhaps yeah, we can share. Perhaps you could post that link in the chat as well if you haven't got a camera on to hand. So essentially what this declaration is capturing our collective commitment as a university and as individuals to our collective commitment and aspiration to reduce inequality by increasing access to knowledge. And as you'll see, as I've got the link here myself, actually, just bear with me.
Yeah. Thank you. Sorry.
And it's based on 4 fundamental principles. So it's universal. Really, the principle is that higher education system is a good for all, to educate the workforce and leaders of tomorrow, but also enriching cultures, improving health and well-being, and driving innovation and entrepreneurship. Collaborative, I mean, that's a really strong aspect. I know for Antonio and myself, as I say, we've collaborated together over the years, and collaboration's a sort of key tenet of what we're trying to do to try and prioritise collaboration over competition. Certainly the way higher education tends to be structured in the UK and globally is very much based on competition, rankings and high impact journal factors and all this kind of thing. Not necessarily in the best interests of science or knowledge production, etc. So we're really trying to work in an inclusive and transdisciplinary way with generosity and compassion, as Antonio alluded to before. It's inclusive. So we recognise the need to include all potential beneficiaries of higher education. That's not just those of us actually within universities, but broader society. The knowledge it creates, enabling practices that provide equal and fair access to all, for leading to equitable outcomes. And the fourth one is sustainability. So we really need to collaborate to ensure that these practices and what we're doing is sustainable for the future. We don't want it just to be sort of a flash in the pan. So please do have a look at the declaration. And as I say, if you agree with the principles, do sign it. And if you're a member of any other organisation, sign it on that behalf as well. Have you anything to add on the declaration, Antonio?
No, I would emphasize the need to actually read it, because for researchers and educators at whatever stage of their career they are, it's very important to understand the principles of openness. There is a strong movement supported by organizations such as UNESCO in that direction. Open education, open science, and knowledge equity is an umbrella concept that covers both, and few more things that we'll discuss in a minute. And I like to share this sense of mission. We are in a mission. And we have certain values, and we have a vision for a better world. This is very important to understand. It's not just being a member of another organization. Being a signatory of the declaration means a personal and professional commitment to these values. So if that's okay, I'm going to play a little video with an introduction to the Knowledge Equity Network by our former Vice Chancellor, Professor Wittendick, and our Vice Chancellor, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Professor Nick Plant. There we go. Fantastic. Well, I hope you like the idea. Yeah. Yeah, it's a very ambitious project, a very ambitious initiative. And we're gonna start asking you questions because we want to understand what your starting point is, and we want to encourage debate. I've seen some very interesting questions and answers in the chat. Yeah, and thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Nick, for the responses.
Yeah, I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt, Antonio, but that question from Omar it cuts to the crux, doesn't it? We need to recognise just how embedded competition is, I think, in the sector, and there's no easy answers to answer that question. So, with some of the questions that Antonio will be asking now, perhaps we can dive into that a little bit.
So we have now this question for you. Have you accessed open education resources, open research outputs before? I mean, it's not many of them here, but it's only an appetizer, a nice break if you want. Yeah.
Again, feel free to contextualise in the chat, since we're so few in number.
Okay, one person to finish. This is a little bit like Big Brother because it's only 5 of us. So yeah. Okay, everybody answered. Okay.
I think people are still trying to access the
the QR
numbers
code,
still going up.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, there is more people than I thought. There are more people than I thought.
8 we're up to. That's an interesting point from Lorna as well.
Okay.
Neoliberal ideology is strong. Yeah, I think that's what it comes down to. We are fighting a global system, aren't we, Lorna?
So yes, I mean there is one answer. Well, there is a 20% don't know. Yeah, and that is very revealing. Yeah, because one of the challenges of open education, the open education movement, and the open science and research movement is that not enough people know what openness in education and openness in research means in practical terms. Yeah, so I am sure that all of you have accessed open educational resources and open research outputs. The question is that we don't often realize, the effort behind that resource being there freely available for you that goes on in the backstage, if you want. Yeah, we are used to see things that are free of access and that can be reused can be republished by others, etc. But we don't recognize that there is a policy, that there is technical work involved into it, that there is infrastructure, etc. behind it. Okay, let's move on to the other question. Yeah, and this is now for you to type. Yeah, so is it a good idea to make freely accessible all educational resources and research outputs produced at universities? Why? Your thoughts? Is it a good idea? Is it not? Why? Anything you want to say. Okay, I think this time, whatever you type will be shown live. So, and you're not restricted to one answer. You can answer many times as many times as you want, I believe. Yeah. Okay. Take your time. We can.
Yeah, while you're there, I don't know if you've seen this, Antonio. I spotted this article earlier that I thought was interesting. I haven't read it in any detail yet, but I'll just share it here because it speaks to what we're talking about today. The whole issue of competitiveness, especially in the geopolitical landscape we're living under at the moment. Yeah.
No, I understand that human beings, in certain occasions, in certain contexts, compete with each other, whether they do it intentionally or not. But the majority of things that we do in our lives, yeah, they're based on collaboration, they're based on mutual respect. They don't involve trying to outflank somebody else, This idea that competition is the essence of human behavior, like trying to establish a parallelism with the natural world, with a film about, a documentary about lions hunting and things like that, it is ridiculous. Competition is overstated, yeah. Yet there are certain contexts where the dominant discourse, the dominant thinking, yeah, is competition, yeah. But competition is as natural as collaboration, yeah. And being selfish is as natural as being generous. And we need to create context in the world, in society, that actually foster, yeah, constructive alignment, collaboration, yeah, co-design, etc. Let's see our answers here.
Yeah, some interesting points coming up already.
Yeah.
Just to address that first one, I don't think so.
Yeah, I'm highlighting them.
You're doing that. Yeah. So I'll leave it to you then.
No. Yes, generally, but depends on the communities who have co-produced the knowledge and how it could be taken and used for different purposes.
We'll come on to that. We will discuss some of the issues.
Is this was 2-3 years ago? Definitely yes. Competition drives innovation and sharing ideas increases competition. But now, due to the use of scrapers taking your data and all this open research output for use in AI, who will really benefit from this? Very interesting. Yeah, we have high level here, Nick.
Yeah, AI is really, is a really important consideration. And again, it's the Wild West, isn't it? They're just these large language models are just chewing up everything they can find, irrespective of copyright or licensing, I think. So there's all sorts of discussions there. Yeah.
Okay, I'll say something.
I just wanted to pick up on that. Just now, third. It was the first point made. I don't think so. Okay. Some of the knowledge will be confidential, potentially confidential. So, yeah, we will come on to that issue as well. In terms of what we call fair data. I don't know if colleagues are aware of that. I'll define it in a moment, and what we tend to term as open as possible, as close as necessary. But there's lots of data governance issues as well around the types of data that can be shared and whether it needs to be shared with controls, etc. So yeah, that's a good point as well.
Yeah, I'm going to say something about artificial intelligence because I can't help talking about it. Sorry. Okay. When we think about the training of large language models, do we want just bad content, low quality content that is freely available because it's very cheap to produce and people want you to read it because of their agendas? Do we want our large language models being trained on low quality content, or do you want the large language models to be trained on high quality content? The question is the cost, of access to that content. And then the question of artificial intelligence. I think we need to move from understanding artificial intelligence, generative artificial intelligence, as a generic interface like ChatGPT that can talk to you about gardening or astronomy or football or anything you want. And we need to consider the potential for artificial intelligence customization with tools such as retrieval augmented generation that allow for reliable content and encourage educators to actually curate the knowledge that the artificial intelligence assistant or agent that you may want to create is going to be looking at when generating responses. I think there is a lot of hype about the churning of content by artificial intelligence. It's justified to an extent, but we need to think about artificial intelligence as something that we, educators, researchers, can take ownership of in many different ways. Yeah.
Well, I don't think I've shared this with you yet, Antonio. I've just posted. We'll be talking about Wikipedia, of course, later. I will be talking. We're doing quite a lot of work around Wikimedia, as it's called on Wikipedia. But that's actually some correspondence just published in Nature, actually, by a colleague here at Leeds and another colleague that we've been working on with Wikimedia that makes this interesting point about how important Wikipedia is for large language models. So colleagues may be interested in that. It was only published last week.
Fantastic. So we move to the next one. Thank you. So Nick, you are supposed to start with this one, yeah?
Yeah, well, with this it's a bit of a dense slide, but sorry for my big letters in the chat as well, really. But these are sort of extracted a little bit from the declaration, and this is quite high level. And I suppose this is one of my concerns, and it was interesting actually just listening back to Nick Plant and Simone Buttendijk talking about the declaration, because it's all these highfalutin ideas and sort of the rhetoric around this stuff's all very well and quite a high level declaration, but obviously what Tony and I hopefully represent, and hopefully you do as well, is this sort of more grassroots and actual practical collaborative work, which is what this represents. So in that context, we're really emphasising the need for collaboration and how it's so important to work together. So as I say, these are quite high level, but in the context of open research, this is drawn directly from the declaration. So that's discussing how we want all research outputs to be accessible immediately on publication on a platform with a license which is open as possible. Is everybody familiar with Creative Commons licensing, or the CC BY license, which is Creative Commons attribution? Just be interested in people's knowledge and awareness of CC BY and any concerns you may have. I mean, we've already heard one in the context of AI. And it also refers to the FAIR data principle. So just before I reveal the answer, our colleagues are familiar with the FAIR acronym? Do you know what FAIR stands for? Put it in the chat if you do. And perhaps tell me your views on CC BY as well. I think we've already had a bit of a discussion in the context of AI. Because, of course, large language models are incapable, as I understand it, of actually giving credit because they don't know where the materials come from. So that actually renders a Creative Commons license useless. But there's lots of legal precedent going on around this at the moment in the States and in the UK.
And Nick, if I can add to that, there is a declaration of UNESCO 2024 called the Declaration of Dubai, who touches upon the overlappings, the intersection, the synergies and issues generated by the adoption of AI in relation to open educational resources, and in relation to things like attribution, of authorship, suggesting, quite interesting ways forward to tackle this technical, ethical nightmare, that comes about when you introduce AI, in the landscape, who is producing the OERs, where are the OERs going? How do you ensure quality? How do you ensure that copyright is not being breached? So I recommend that you read the Declaration of Dubai 2024 if you want to learn more about these issues.
Too much to read, though, isn't there? Perhaps I'll ask ChatGPT to summarise it for me. No, I'm actually a bit of a Luddite with AI, and I do worry about the climate impacts as well. I think Laura's still typing. Nobody's indicated yet. Told me what FAIR means. I'm just wondering if colleagues are familiar with it, or any concerns or knowledge around CC BY, because this is another area that we as a university and as a sector, I think, need to educate colleagues in and engage in sort of collaborative discussion.
Okay, should I move to the next one, Nick?
Hang on, I was just waiting for some. My slide hasn't worked. You know what I think? Yeah, it was supposed to. Don't know why it's not worked. Anyway, FAIR stands for findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. So FAIR data isn't necessarily open. Open data should be fair, but fair data isn't necessarily open. So it could be restricted access, for example, if there's data derived from human participants with ethical issues around sharing, etc. So this is what I was saying before in terms of data not necessarily being fully open, but it's still accessible and reusable under an open license, which perhaps addresses that point that was made on the chat earlier. So over to you, Antonio, for open education.
Yeah. Thank you. So as you can see, we are going through some of the bits of the declaration, trying to unpick them. So in the declaration, when it asks, there is a heading at the end and say, what can you do individually as a professional, yeah, to support the Declaration on Knowledge Equity? And one of the recommendations of the declaration is to embrace educational practices. You know, the declaration is telling you as a professional, as an individual, that you should embrace educational practices built around collaboration, discovery, and the creation of knowledge, inviting peers and colleagues to be involved. So when the declaration was written, they have to have some sort of economy of the language, you know, compressing concepts. So when we talk here about educational practices built around collaboration, discovery, blah, 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 we are talking a well-known concept in the open education movement and the literature on open education, because this is also a field of inquiry and research in itself. And the concept is open educational practices. And open educational practices became, you know, very much the focus of the inquiries of activists and researchers in the open education movement. Once we realized, because I was somehow part of it, that it wasn't just about producing open educational resources, producing digital content that is reusable, that is adaptable for free, technically and legally, by others. Yeah, that would be a quick concept of open educational resources. That the practices, the activities that go on in the process of producing those resources are as important and should be as open as the outputs themselves. Yeah, so the open educational practices can be defined as any activities, strategies, approaches to ensure democratic, participatory, collaborative processes for knowledge production, and in our case, educational knowledge production. Yeah, and you may wonder, but what this is about then? It's about organizing groups and working together. It's not just that. It's about, for instance, making open and transparent your work as you progress. It involves including others, trying to get communities to participate in the knowledge production processes, you know, bringing a nice mixture of expertise and interest, yeah, and involvement when it comes to who is in the team, who are producing these resources, etc. And interestingly, yesterday we had a presentation here at the University of Leeds of a Leeds designed work that is called the Leeds Playbook for Co-Creation, that even though it's not really conceived as part of an open education initiative formally, it very much touches upon the need and is a response to the need to articulate these processes. Because what does it mean? Collaborate, what does it mean? That we have a WhatsApp group and we talk to each other, that we meet regularly, that we help each other, that we listen to each other. There is more to it, yeah? And it's a question of organizing your processes and organizing your activities. So that's what the declaration is advocating for. It's not just about publishing OER, yeah, or using OER. It's about embedding the principles of openness in everything that we do as much as possible. So we have a little bit of a VVox pause again, yeah? So I'm going to share, yeah, and open again. We want to know what you think. I'm going to start sharing now. Present full screen. And here we are. This is our question for you. Why do you think opening research outputs and educational resources is not so easy? Okay, open question. Yeah, this is very much if you all are from a specific field of research, okay? Some of you maybe from chemistry, inorganic chemistry. Some of you maybe from social linguistics, from a very specific field within social linguistics. We all have, our specialization, yeah, within research. Open educational resources and open educational practices in itself, not just an area of educational activism or knowledge equity activism, but also, it's a specific field within education, within social sciences education. Yeah, so there are a lot of articles, with very valuable research about open educational resources, open educational practices. So I recommend it to you because, I was at the beginning trying to emphasize the question of the values, that we do this because we believe in it. It's a mission. It's about justice. It's about equity. Yeah, it's about having a better world. But there is a lot of science underpinning what the movement has to offer. Okay, we have we have answers here. What do you think, Nick?
I just realised actually, Antonio, I think you can only post one answer on the VVote. So if anybody's got any other thoughts, put them in the chat.
Exactly. Good question. Good move. Sorry.
The way we set up, I think.
Yeah. So what do you think? Commercial ownership of IP and infrastructure. Yeah.
Cost of publishing. We'll come on to that in terms of which is similar issue.
Yeah. I'm waiting for an answer here of something that I think is very important and hasn't been mentioned yet. Let's see if anybody can think about it. I'll give you the clue. Where do I work? Anybody remembers where I work? School of Languages and Societies. What is the missing word there? Let's see. Maybe the process isn't clear. Trust. It seems complex.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny when you think about it that it's such an embedded set of practices in what we do, closing things, that we think about closing and hiding as the easy thing when it should be the other way around. Being open shouldn't require an effort. There is an effort in hiding.
Is there something about quality control there? That trust question. I think people do have concerns historically about open access and open education lacking quality potentially.
Yeah, I would say that there is more quality in things that are published following. Well, I would say no, I am convinced that there is more quality when the standards produced and agreed by the community of experts, and activists in open education, when the standards of quality of open education resources are followed, than when things are published and just traditional normal mechanisms of quality assurance are followed. This is interesting because the question of quality has been a concern, undoubtedly since the beginning of the open educational resources movement at the very beginning of the 21st century. Quality was always there, but because it was a concern, it's actually a very well developed framework with very clear standards, with a lot of work put into it. So when somebody tells me I have produced this OER and I have followed standards for quality for OER, I'm satisfied. I'm more satisfied than when somebody says I put this in the internet and it's really good. How do you know that it's good? I mean, the quality standards for OER are very clear and very well developed. The quality standards for things in the digital space it's a bit more vague. Okay. Yeah, I was meaning culture, yeah. Culture, our beliefs, yeah, what we do and take for granted as correct or appropriate and adequate, yeah, is a cultural question, yeah. It's a matter of understanding what make us continue doing things the way they have been always done, yeah, and why society accept things, even if they may be contradictory with the values and the ideas that we support. Cost of publishing. Nick, do you want to say any of? Let's
Well,
see.
I'm going to come on to that in a bit more detail because, yeah, it's a massive one. And also somebody just posted there then about the fact that publishing practices are different in different disciplines and sometimes their expectations to publish. So I've just posted, often that's referred to as publish or perish. And this is
Yeah.
another cultural aspect, I think. And we'll talk a little bit about research culture and how that can be problematic as well. And that's another area that we in the university is looking at in a lot of detail. But yeah, there's certainly the commercial ownership of publishing is deeply problematic, and I will talk about that in a bit more detail in a moment.
Yeah. And before I forget, remember that we have, Nick and I have a list of things to cover, like a tick list. Yeah. And one thing that we haven't mentioned yet, reward and recognition. The declaration acknowledges that in order to change this culture and in order to provide more value to openness, we need to review how reward and recognition are implemented in our professions. Are we being rewarded and recognized for publishing in open journals instead of having to publish in certain places?
So that comes back to Omar's question at the beginning, doesn't it? In terms of, ultimately these cultural expectations are embedded in the academy, and we certainly as a single university can't change it alone. We as individuals can't, which is where the issue of collaboration comes in, I think.
The Declaration of Knowledge Equity has got three fundamental pillars: open science, open research, we call it open research, open education, and then equity, diversity, and inclusion. Yeah. And there are some definitions there about equity, diversity, and inclusion, although in the text it appears as equality. So it's about recognizing the underlying inequalities also within the knowledge production processes, because you could say, okay, so we are going to open our outputs, we are going to collaborate, but what happens when people have different starting points, when they are not as ready to collaborate and participate as others, because of the inequities that they suffer? I mean, it's all very well to say, Antonio, you are an equal member of the academic community, you are entitled to participate as much as anybody else. But what happens if, I live in a place where I don't even have access to the internet, or where I cannot actually have access to knowledge that allows me to contribute to this community, and that happens in other areas, like thinking about equity, diversity, and inclusion. Also in the world of education, who can access education, why there are certain people who don't have that possibility. So thinking about those inequities, those inequalities in the world, thinking about who can have access to knowledge production, and why, is part of our critical reflection on knowledge equity. But I'd like to know your views, actually, that we have a little poll, and it's probably the last one. Let me go back to this. So I'd like to know your thoughts about this, because even though it may look very logical, that open education, open research, equity, diversity, and inclusion are part of the same challenge, yeah, and they are related to each other. Not everybody thinks that that's the case, yeah, or we are probably the first ones in the knowledge equity network. I mean, I believe that we are the first ones in looking at the three components together, yeah. The UNESCO recommendations on open science and open education resources are different, even though many people recognize the relationship between both, because they are related in many ways, and we can discuss it. They have been treated institutionally and conceptually as different things, yeah. And equity and diversity and inclusion as well. Not many people have been thinking about what it means in relation to those two other constructs, yeah. So is equity, diversity, and inclusion a key component of knowledge equity? Do you think it is? Alongside open education and open research? Yes, no, why? What are the implications? Okay. Oh, but root cause EDI, not the questionable tick box corporate EDI. I like it. I like the revolutionary spirit of this answer. Yeah, I agree with you. Both are currently being challenged in the US. I know.
I think it's important to acknowledge that, though, in the global context, because obviously the US has always been very influential and continues to be so in a context now where they're explicitly stripping EDI or DEI, do they call it in the States, from everything, and that's affecting the infrastructure and the research dissemination as well. It's all tied up together.
Yeah, but I like to see when we think about this type of negative activities, I like to think that there is a vast majority of educators and academics in the USA who support equity, diversity, and inclusion.
Of course.
So this is about a government, and this is about voters who have chosen to vote wherever they have chosen for whatever the reason, yeah. And I like to praise the work of many educators and researchers in the United States who have shaped actually these ideas. A lot of these ideas have been fostered somehow there, so all my praise for those colleagues and friends in the other side of the Atlantic. And going back to this answer, we need to take this seriously, because EDI is not just about ticking boxes. Yeah, it should be something that we consider in our daily lives. Are we being inclusive? Are we not? What does respecting and promoting diversity means in different contexts? Yeah, and it should be a personal mission of every person, and not just something that is another process. Yeah. Let's look at this. People with different backgrounds and experiences will have differing amounts of access to knowledge, funding, publishing opportunities, and decision making. Absolutely. Do you want to say something about the alternative forms knowledge systems, for instance? Nick, are we talking about that? I think
I've got a slide on these issues. I mean, it's really I'd be interested in others' perspectives, because these are sort of some of the core ideas that are coming up.
Yeah, let me see. This is a separate but important issue. I am the first of my family to go to higher education, let alone into academia. I'm severely underrepresented in the workplace. I bring things which others do not due to my culture and identity. There is so much more untapped potential since there aren't more people from certain groups here. Absolutely. But I have to say that Leeds is a wonderful place for it. I'm not from here either. Yeah, as you may see in my name, I'm from abroad. And I know many people from abroad in our university who feel welcomed. And I think if you are not from England, this is a good place to be. Okay, and I hope we can do more for everybody who's been joining the university as a student or as a member of staff. Yeah. I say this because I'm older than probably most of you, and I have seen horrible things in places that are not the University of Leeds, yeah, and particularly in the private sector and in other areas of society. I think universities are warm, welcoming, good places in general. Although we still have a lot of work to do, and we have to keep improving things. But anyway. Are we done with this, Nick, do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it is interesting that some of the key points are coming out, and I'll certainly talk about them in a bit more detail in a moment. I was just, again, you suggested, Antonio, that Leeds is obviously, these are systemic issues. I haven't looked at that in any detail, but there are gender pay gaps in Leeds, for example, and associated with other minority groups as well, which I think are expressed there, not just gender in that. I was just having a quick look. There's a post the previous link, actually.
Yeah.
So again,
that's true.
It's about data, isn't it? And if we've got the data, you can actually do something about it. And that's one of the problems I think that's going on in America at the moment, because they're destroying all the data. I'll share the slides again.
Okay, so I'm now moving. It's fine. So I'm moving to slide number 12.
There you go.
Yeah. So challenges to knowledge equity in the area of education. By the way, let me clarify, because I don't think I have done it properly, the connections between open education and open science that at least I find that many people agree with this. For instance, when you are engaging in open research, and you are including communities in your activities as a researcher, and you are trying to democratize knowledge production by having long-lasting relationships with communities of lived experience, or with communities of expertise, when you are practicing open science principles, in a way, there is a continuum with open education, because open research is also an educational, it involves an educational component in many respects, when you are learning from others and they all are learning from you through your research. And also, when you are publishing, research related outputs, many of them could very well be, classed as educational. If you are opening your research to wider communities and you are producing podcasts, as we talk in a minute about it, you are connecting, you are creating open education resources that are based on your open research activities. There are many other ways of looking at it, but this is one of them. Anyway, so thinking about education in particular, so what are the challenges and what are the aspirations? So this is taken from the UNESCO 2019 recommendation on open education resources, and by the way, I've put there a Creative Commons license with a link to the deed. I believe that you can go with your mouse, and click on the CC by attribution share alike, so that you can see what a license looks like, and that's the best way to do it. You put the icon of the license and then you link with the image, the content of the license. So this is kind of copied from the UNESCO recommendation, and that's why I have cited it. So what happens with the challenges? What do we need, to ensure that there is more open educational resources and more educational practices being adopted? We need to have capacity in terms of infrastructure, in terms of training, in terms of tools, availability of these basic instruments, and human capacities that allow for open education to flourish. We need policies. We at the University of Leeds are pioneers in having an open education resources policy. We had the best and the first ever policy in the country. I was part of it, of the committee who wrote this policy back I think it's 13, 14 years ago, and now we are going hopefully to have a new open education resources policy. But we have a policy, meaning that our staff know, that OER is good, is accepted and is promoted institutionally, and they have a framing for it, We also have a guidance on open education resources at the university, in the library. Great work by my colleague Kirstin. So we need capacity building, supportive policy, so that people know where they stand professionally, international cooperation. I mean, you can't do this just in isolation, You need to generate collaboration with people who are experts in your subject so that you can develop together resources, because it's a question of economies of scale, and diversity recognition to avoid duplicity as well, And then because OER are meant to be free at the end of the experience, if you are the end user, you're supposed to be able to download and reuse, etc., enjoy the open educational resource. There has to be a financial sustainability model for these operations, because even though they are free, they have a cost. So you need to have models whereby, things are clearly defined about who covers the cost of what. And all that can lead to effective, inclusive, and equitable access to quality OER. So these are the 5 pillars, of the recommendation of UNESCO. Nick.
So challenges to knowledge equity in the context of research. So I think we've alluded to some of these already. So the image you can see, the sort of wheel shape on the right-hand side, is from another UNESCO report. So that's from the UNESCO Open Science Toolkit. And we in the UK, and at Leeds in particular, we tend to talk about open research rather than open science. Principles are essentially the same. We tend to talk about open research really to be more inclusive of the humanities, sort of linguistically, whereas the rest of Europe tends to talk about open science, where I think etymologically it tends to cover the same sort of area. But you can see, I quite like this illustration because it sort of covers the different aspects. So starting with open scientific knowledge. So this is things like open access to articles, books, research reports, conference papers, research data. We talked about research data already. Also educational resources. So this is, again, they are separate but related in terms of outputs, and educational resources are part of that. Open source software and source code. There's a huge area. I'm no expert, I'm no coder, but in terms of open source code, and that can be crucial to sort of reproducing research results, this kind of thing. And also open hardware, so specifications of computer systems and this kind of thing. And if you think, going back to that neoliberal point, that everything is so proprietary these days and tends to be owned by corporations, and that has really severe knock-on effects for equity in all sorts of different ways. Talks about open source, open science infrastructures as well. So that's things like, I'm sure everybody's familiar with the DOI, Digital Object Identifier. So even that carries a cost to actually publish research with a Digital Object Identifier that ensures persistence over time and citability, that kind of thing. We'll go into some of those implications in a moment. Then there's things, open dialogue with other knowledge systems, I think, is a really interesting area as well. And again, something that tends to be dismissed by perhaps the right wing, certainly in America, in terms of, science is the only epistemologically valid knowledge system, which, I'm sure we could dispute at length. And then the fourth one there, my screen's too small, I can't quite read it, even though I should know it, is open engagement of societal actors. So again, this is working with citizen science, etc., these kinds of things. But in terms of the specific challenges, I think, to some of these issues in the context of research, I've sort of highlighted a few there. So in terms of These issues are both local and global. Obviously, we're fortunate to be in a very relatively wealthy country in the UK with a well-established, high rates of literacy, that kind of thing. Nevertheless, there are obviously disparities within Leeds, let alone the country. And in terms of, I'm always interested in discussions about what a university is actually for. Historically, it's been a bit of an ivory tower, and increasingly there's a drive to get into the local society and actually influence the local society, notwithstanding some of the budget cuts we're seeing at the moment. And obviously that's important in a global context as well. So the global south is the obvious example versus the global north. And some of the statements from UNESCO, for example, talk about making multilingual scientific knowledge openly available, accessible and reusable for everybody, because obviously English tends to be the lingua franca, but that can be exclusionary in all sorts of different ways. Increase scientific collaborations and sharing of information for the benefits of science and society. And again, a lot of the cultural aspects that we'll come on to in terms of the way the culture of science works in the global north, at least, is not necessarily conducive to science, and certainly not to the benefit of society in lots of different ways. And open to the process of scientific knowledge creation, evaluation and communication to societal actors beyond the traditional scientific community. So again, this is about trying to open up. Those are direct quotes from UNESCO. So an example in that context might be health, climate and poverty. So obviously poverty is an issue, as I say, potentially in Leeds, certainly in a global context, in the global north versus the global south. Issues of climate change, we know, are disproportionately affecting perhaps poorer communities in the global south, for example, or even in the UK, compared to more wealthy areas with the education, etc. So it's important to involve people in those issues. Interdisciplinary collaboration around the sustainability development goals is something that's emphasised as well by UNESCO. Now, this is one we've touched on already, but the issues around the cost to publish and the sort of baked in inequities and inequalities there. So historically, open access, historically access to research was based on a subscription model. So you and I and us being members of a university and having library subscriptions through our library will be able to access research. But of course, that would be behind a paywall. Still, an awful lot of research is behind the paywalls, and you'll all have seen, even at a big university, costs $50 or whatever to access a particular research paper. Increasingly, we've moved towards open access, but increasingly that's been controlled by proprietary commercial publishers through what's called the APC model, so the article processing charge, that stands for. And just out of interest, does anybody know offhand how much it would cost to publish a single article, one article, the article processing charge in the journal Nature, which is a very high profile journal article? Just post your guesses in the chat while I have a drink. Does anybody actually know how much it costs?
I don't know. I can have an educated guess, but I don't know.
Well, both of those guesses are, even if we add them up, you're still not there. You're getting there now. If we add all of those up, it's 10,000 euros to publish one article in Nature, £9,000. The average cost for open access publishing is more like £2,500 per article, averaged out in different journals, which is obviously usually expensive, nowhere near the high impact journal that is Nature, which is clearly an issue for a university like Leeds or Harvard, or Oxford or Cambridge, let alone universities in the global south, to publish in that context. So that's a clear issue on equity. Are colleagues familiar with the term diamond open access? So what we're talking about here with the APC model tends to be referred to as gold open access, where you pay to publish very often, as opposed to green open access, where versions of subscription-based articles are put in a repository like the White Rose repository, whereas diamond open access is more of a distributed model. So a good example is the Open Library of the Humanities. So for the Open Library of the Humanities, which is obviously, as the name suggests, in a publisher of journals in the humanities, there's no author-facing charges and there's no reader-facing charges, and it's funded by a collaboration. So we as a university at Leeds pay a relatively modest fee annually to the Open Library of the Humanities, as do many other libraries in the UK, and that pays for so their business model is based. Thanks, Faze. Thanks for coming. Do please get in touch if you've got any questions around this stuff. So Diamond Open Access is an interesting model in that context. Touched on different knowledge systems. So colleagues have already mentioned issues around marginalised scholars. I've got some interesting facts and figures actually around some of this issue, but you know, it's often referred to as multiply marginalised and unrepresented scholars. We also had the issue of unrepresented scholars before. So, you know, that could be people of colour or women, the LGBTQ community, people with disabilities, Indigenous peoples very often, and again that's the sort of intersectional issues here with in terms of the funding, etc., that we've already touched on. And essentially underrepresentation occurs because scholars are insufficiently represented, we've already touched on that as well, and often lack the recognition they deserve in the fields of study, and that underrepresentation happens even though, as the colleagues stated before on the questions we had, they can actually speak to a topic with just as much, if not more, authority than their more commonly recognised colleagues. So these are clearly systemic issues that all play into issues of knowledge equity. Then you've got questions around knowledge sovereignty and the fact that and governance. So it's important to recognise the rights of knowledge holders to receive fair and equitable share of benefits that may arise from their use of knowledge. So very historically, you know, we've got a sort of colonial extractive perspective on extracting information and data out of Africa, say, or the global south more generally. And I'll post a link in a moment to the care principles. So these tend to go along with the FAIR principles, and the care principles it's Indigenous data governance. So it relates to collective benefit, authority of control, responsibility and ethics. So again, it's trying to address these issues and potentially, thanks Pinglu, thank you for coming, inequity in terms of this type of issue. Research infrastructure, we've touched on it again, so things like DOIs. So Jen and I both work with systems like Scopus, you may have heard of, which is the sort of proprietary database of publications, but it's heavily biased to research from the global north versus the global south. So very often this means that research in the global south is actually invisible. There are alternatives, like OpenAlex is a developing platform that's non-proprietary. Africa Archive is an example of a preprint server that's run not-for-profit for African research. So there are, or OGS stands for Open Journal System. So again, this is another open source system trying to address some of these issues. But that in itself leads to global biases in research metrics, which compromises visibility of research from the global south. So again, I'll just read you some facts and figures there that relate to this, if you can find them, or are they? So yes, tools like Scopus index research, but if they're not indexed, then they tend to be biased because they inevitably are. And this disproportionately affects scholars from the global south. So I'll read this out for you. For a striking, we've done geographical imbalance in research funding. So Africa is home to 15% of the world's population, bears 25% of the global burden of disease, yet generates just 2% of the global research output. So again, data can obviously inform these types of issues to try and understand where we're missed opportunities engaging with Indigenous knowledge and solutions, for example, as well as dissemination of knowledge more broadly. But again, then to come back to that issue of the Web of Science and Scopus, it disproportionately favours research from the global north, which leads to the exclusion of valuable research from the global south. And there's another talk that I'll post a link to that was fascinating actually in terms of open journal systems. There's data that it's heavily used in the global north, but it's hardly indexed at all by systems like Scopus, etc. So all that research, you've got the cost of the DOIs, the cost of the infrastructure, and it's not being indexed and not being made visible to scholars, for example, in the global north, nor the inequity with funding. So they're really deep systemic issues with a lot of this, and then it all ties in with issues of research culture. So that issue with Nature costing £9,000 to publish one article. And this is tied in with so-called journal impact factor. And again, somebody made that point earlier that certain disciplines expect you to publish in certain highly reputable journals, for example, often based on journal impact factor, which is used as a proxy for research quality. So DORA, which stands for the Declaration on Research Assessment, is emphasising responsible metrics and that these shouldn't be used for as a proxy for research quality. And again, that ties in with EDI issues because very often marginalised scholars, for example, wouldn't have the same access to resources to publish in these high impact journals. So it's all interrelated and really, really difficult to sort of unpick, and certainly needs lots of collaboration. So be interested in anybody's sort of thoughts or anything that's new on that to you on that side of things before I'll pass back to you, Antonio.
Thank you, Nick. So we're going to show a few examples of what you can do if you want to contribute to knowledge equity beyond signing the declaration, of course. And I think, Nick, you're going to talk about the co-production research toolkit first, or do I go first?
Well, I don't know a huge amount about it, actually. I just put that on there because I know this is something that colleagues have been working on, and it's something I want to look at in more detail. I think I don't know if you can comment on co-production more generally, but this is a toolkit that's out of the LSSI.
No, I'll say briefly one thing about it is that it's very easy to talk about collaboration, but how do we articulate collaboration and how do we make sure that it's efficient, effective, democratic, etc. So have a look to that toolkit, and let's move on to podcasting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so could you pass the slide? No, it's all right. So I'm going to talk about a little case study of a project, Open Lives, that I was part of as one of the authors of the research and the development in this funded project called Open Lives. And Open Lives started as a digitization of life stories or history of Spanish migrants in the UK, in France, in Germany, in other parts of Europe. And it was about bringing the stories, the migration stories of people to the public in the form of the recordings becoming open educational resources. So we had about 30 oral history interviews that were digitized and were given Creative Commons licenses so that they could become open educational resources being used for teaching, also for research, why not? So in the project, I developed pedagogical applications for these open educational resources to be used in practice. So I created a module that still exists, although it has now a different module code, etc., something that we still teach. And in that module, my students have to interview people, following obviously some introduction to basic research methods and having ethical approval. My students have to interview people who have migrated to Leeds from Spain, and then produce a podcast with the extracts of interviews of their own research, intertwined with extracts from those other interviews that we had from migrants that had gone to other parts of Europe in the 1940s and 1950s. Okay, so it was a way to engage into co-creation of knowledge with communities of people, bringing the voices of those other persons who had been interviewed previously by a different team, whose interviews were actually published as open education resources, and creating a virtuous cycle, of co-production and sharing. So students would become researchers. Students would look at knowledge from a different perspective because they would be interrogating knowledge creation from a different perspective. They could create their own podcasts, which meant that they were exploring different ways of producing academic knowledge, and we were questioning academic literacies. We were questioning through openness the ways in which we produce knowledge, and looking at the values, underpinning that knowledge creation activity, because it wasn't one student writing a dissertation or an essay by themselves, in the library, without talking to anybody, without collaborating with anybody. That form of knowledge production, was being questioned by an alternative form of knowledge production, which is go out there, talk to people, interview them, research on what other people have said, include it in your work, and produce something, a podcast for the community, something that is shareable. So this is what we did with open lives, and then now we do offer a similar module that covers not only migration but any other topic, and covers any other language or area of the world, not just Spain, Latin America. So what we do is to replicate, at undergraduate level, some of the principles that we've been discussing about openness in research and openness in education. And just to put you in a little bit into context, the question of open research, open science, when it comes to engaging with people, that is about democratization of knowledge is contrary to the idea of data extraction. Hello, can you give me your data? Oh, thank you for your data. Bye. It's about having a different type of engagement with the communities that we're trying to learn things from. It should be try to learn things with them. Of course, not in every subject and not in every area. This is possible in the same way. But there are some shared open research and open education principles that can be applied to absolutely anything and everything. The question of how you apply it depends on what you're trying to research. And sometimes it's about having the right type of research questions and research framing so that you can include these principles. Because if you start asking the questions in a certain way and setting your work in a certain direction, then of course you're probably making it difficult for these principles and for these strategies to be applicable. So you need to, there is a little bit of engineering about your research questions and your research activities if you want to be more open. And Nick, Wikimedia champions.
Well, you had
you need to pass it.
Yeah. So thank you for sticking with us, those that have. I know it's getting late on a Friday, but I just wanted to quickly touch on a subject that I'm particularly passionate about, and that we're doing an awful lot of work at the University of Leeds Libraries in particular. We have recently appointed a colleague, actually, who is Wikimedia and Open Knowledge Advisor. And the rationale really for a lot of this work is that, if lay people are looking for information, we've already looked at the influence on artificial intelligence, are looking for information, what's the first resource you tend to hit, and which is increasingly being used by AI, is Wikimedia or Wikipedia. Wikimedia is the broader suite of tools. So we've done quite a lot of work in this area, working with postgraduate researchers. We had a Wikimedia Champions project, where we had PGRs from 4 faculties, so it's multidisciplinary. We had all sorts of different colleagues there. We had people working in dress history. That's a new article we wrote on dress history, or that the colleague wrote on dress history. We had somebody working on DNA origami, whatever that. We had somebody else involved in cryogenic microscopy. That's the image you can just see at the back there, which I've translated into a number of different languages with different colleagues. And there's as I say, quite a lot of evidence that this improves colleagues' information literacy. It can be used in teaching, etc. So yeah, we're doing all sorts of work in this. There's even some poems that we publish as part of this in a podcast. So I'll post some links in a moment if you're interested in learning more about that. And if you would like us to come and speak to your school or faculty about contributing to Wikipedia, we do what's called editathons and teach people how to edit it and make it better, because the point is that obviously Wikipedia isn't necessarily perfect. It certainly isn't in lots of ways, but if you have the expertise in a given subject, then you can improve it. So that's an example of how the information fits together. So everybody's familiar with Wikipedia, which is the encyclopedia that everybody can edit. So that's an example of Lord Byron. But Wikimedia Commons is where the images tend to be drawn from. So I'll post the image, that image in a moment of the cryogenic electron microscope. Then it's linked to statements of fact or in Wikidata, and then it's Wikisource as well, which in this case is examples of out of copyright works from Lord Byron. So really interesting sort of open knowledge and open education environment that's got lots of potential to learn about open licensing to repurpose research and open educational resources in ways that actually expose it to a global audience and potentially translate it into other languages as well, because Wikipedia exists in over 300 different languages. So again, that speaks to the UNESCO issue of actually translating material into different languages. And of course, Elon Musk, you may have heard, is anti-Wikipedia, which is another reason to contribute to it, and in my view. So just before we finish, Antonio, I'll let you talk about press.
I'm going to be very brief because I have a meeting in 7 minutes. Okay, so first of all, Pressbooks, a fantastic initiative by our libraries. Pressbook is a platform for the production and sharing of open textbooks, but it could not. It can also be a valid platform for monographs, because it's about the format of the book. So we have at the University of Leeds an account in the platform Pressbooks that is available for our staff, and I would say also for our students, for producing open textbooks collaboratively that are to be shared as open educational resources and can be, published in open for the rest of the world. So I invite you to have a look at it. We have several books being written right now, and it's a fantastic experience. Books being written by colleagues in our different faculties, in collaboration with other people in other parts of the world. And the other one is the Open and Digital Education Incubator. I'm the lead of this incubator, and it's part of Leeds Institute for Teaching Excellence. And the focus of the incubator of ideas is an open space for supporting research scholarship in the area of open and digital education. Is meant to be informed by the principles of openness as well. So we're going to build a community around the incubator to explore scholarship around open and digital education. So it's not just about talking and researching and discussing and implementing tangible developments in student education in the area of open and digital education. It's also about doing it following openness principles. So I think we are about to finish now.
Do you want to talk about the incubator?
Yeah, that's the incubator. Yeah.
You're already on behind the slides.
Yeah.